Jeff. I've known Pastor Jeff for actually quite a while. So before he was Pastor Jeff and before he was married and all that, he came to Trinity. I was there. So I've taught at Trinity for 20 years. So Trinity Bible College in Ellendale, which I'm glad that Jordan and Joe are going to be coming there. So it's going to be awesome, actually. It's an awesome place. But Pastor Jeff was there, and one thing I'll just give you just a little tip off. If you guys like football, if you've ever done football and this thing called fantasy football where you get together with a group of people, usually guys, but get together with a group of people and you pick your players and you play against each other. Pastor Jeff started a league way back when before he was married, all that sort of stuff. He started a league, which a bunch of us joined in. He wanted us to. He's not in that league any longer, but that league still goes on. It's like 15, 18 years later, something like that. So that's something that he started and probably doesn't even realize it's still going. So I think you're privileged to have, to have Pastor Jeff and Jen here as your pastors now. They're good people. He's gone through a lot. He's learned a lot. I'm quite sure he's learned a lot, actually. Okay, this morning I'm going to preach on Psalm chapter 1. So for those of you who don't know me, which is basically everyone except for a couple of students, Kelvin is back there, and Sadie, one of our awesome graduates, is here. So I was privileged to go on a trip twice, 2 trips, I think, Israel. Yeah, so 2 trips with Sadie, missions trip type thing with Sadie, and I had a good time. I suppose you did? Okay, so Sadie says she did, yeah. We had a good time. So I know those people, the rest of you I don't really know, so you probably don't know me very well either. My name's Aaron Thurber. I'm married. I have 4 children. 2 are already married, so they're out of the house. I have 2 teenager boys that are still in the house. We're working through that, right? So anyways, they'll be graduating here in 5 or so years, something like that. One of them will graduate sooner than that. But anyways, my wife also works at the college as all sorts of different roles. Sometimes she teaches a few classes. She's the cross-country coach. She's the dessert baker for the cafeteria and whatever else she might want to do or something like that. Oh, and she substitute teaches at the school as well. So I just teach at the college directly. So actually, currently, I'm the chair of the Biblical and Theological Studies Department. So that's the fancy name for being in charge of making sure things get done for the Bible sort of end of the school. So I'm doing that. I enjoy that. If you're wondering where I'm from, I actually grew up in New York. So not the city, but upstate New York. So just so you know me, I grew up in upstate New York on a dairy farm and milked cows my entire life since I was a little kid. And I had assumed I would take that over, like that was kind of the plan, but in a roundabout way, and a long way around the barn, so to speak, God had other plans. So eventually I went to college, started studying engineering, did fine, but didn't like it necessarily. Thought that I'd go to Bible college for a year, went for a year, turned into 2 years, that turned into 4 years, that turned into, I think God must want me to do this, which turned into going to seminary for longer than it was supposed to, but that was about 4.5 years of seminary. And like, I think God wants me to do this, went to graduate school. So that involves Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, and then came out here to North Dakota. So we've been here again 20 years in Ellendale, lived there, and have been teaching since 2001 at Trinity, which is great. So I've seen a lot of students come through there. Really excited to see Joe come and Jordan, but Joe, you'll get a lot of me actually in classes and stuff. So if you like me, good. If you don't, then just pretend. That, you don't have to like me. Just pretend you like me. Okay, we're going to do. Did it come up here? Did you put it up, Calvin? Psalm 1 and 2. Okay, couldn't find it. But anyways, I'm actually going to preach 2 chapters of the Bible. So I told Pastor Jeff I would preach chapter 1, and he's like, "Well, that's pretty long." And I was like, "Oh, actually, since I've talked to him, I wanted to preach chapter 2 as well. They kind of go together. That's why." So I'm going to read these 2 chapters from Psalms, Psalm 1 and then Psalm 2. You can turn in your Bible there. If you have it on your phone or something, you pull that up. I'm going to read from the English Standard Version, ESV. I think Pastor Jeff told me he had been using that, and then he switched back to New American Standard Bible recently. If I think that's where he's going with that, as far as the versions he's using. As an aside, if you're interested, if you use New American Standard, NASB, that's like one of your versions, They're coming out with a new one later. It might be on shelves now, but they're coming out with a new version of that or an updated version of that later this year. So that should be pretty good. I think that'll be a good thing because it's a very literal version of the Bible, but yet it should be in some, better, more updated language. But I'm using ESV here. So this morning, I'm going to read from Psalm chapter 1 and then also chapter 2. And I'm going to read them right in a row. I'm not really going to stop in between. Then we'll go back and talk about them. Psalm chapter 1, starting with verse 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but they're like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Psalm chapter 2. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and and terrify them in his fury, saying, As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise. Be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way. For his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. I'm going to preach both of these Psalms together. I'm actually going to kind of work backwards. So we're going to go to Psalm 2, sort of discuss that, and then push that back into Psalm chapter 1. At the end, I'm actually going to have a response time, call that an altar call. Kind of two types of people, sort of one group from chapter 2, one group from chapter 1. You might find yourself fitting into one of those categories, and if you do, I'm going to ask you to respond, to talk to God about it at the end, and maybe you can come up and play a song during that altar time. Psalm chapter 2, we've got this chapter here that is about groups of people. So it's not about, chapter 1's about one person. Blessed is the one person who follows the Lord. In chapter 2, we have the opposite. We have groups of people not following the Lord. So people like nations or peoples or kings or rulers, all those in those first verses there of Psalm chapter 2. And they aren't praising the Lord. They're not putting their efforts together to accomplish something good. They're actually, according to this psalm, putting their efforts together to accomplish something not good. So what do? They rage, they plot, they take counsel together amongst themselves, and they go against the Lord. And they say things like, we find in verse 3 there, let us burst their bonds apart. This is God and his anointed. Let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. If you've ever paid attention to the news, especially, it seems like we get more and more news nowadays, right? So we get more and more news happening because of technology. It pushes it to us a lot more. So I used to read the newspaper. My wife literally just asked me yesterday, should we still get the newspaper? Because they don't deliver it on time most of the time. It's just kind of a mess. So should we still get the newspaper? It seems like it's a waste of money. I was like, if I didn't get a newspaper, it would be the first time I didn't have a newspaper since I was a kid. Like, I've always been a reader, so, like, I always read the newspaper. It's probably outdated, nowadays. It's probably not the fastest and quickest and bestest way to find things out, but I like it. It's a piece of paper. So, and actually, this is what I told her. I use the newspaper to dry my boots out, like when I go hunting or something in the fall, And when we go camping, I use the newspaper to start the campfire. And like, what else will we do? It's the driest kind of paper. Anyways, she said it's $8 down the drain. So we'll see where that goes. But anyways, people do that. You get news from all over the place. Many of you probably get news pretty much constantly fed through your phone. Some form of social media. It's almost constant bombardment with updates. The updates are very rarely things like, here's what's going on in the world that's good. Or very rarely, we had a 90 bushel wheat harvest because God helped us. That's not usually what's pushed through on your phone, the text. It's usually there are rulers that are taking counsel together. What are they up to? Most of us don't know half the time. No, they don't tell us the truth. You find out later that it wasn't what they said, things like that. Or the nations are raging. So if you're following any recent news, there's nations raging against Israel right now, for instance. A lot of nations actually doing something like that. At times, maybe the United States is too. I don't know. People's plotting in vain, kings of the earth setting themselves up to break off God's cords. What are they going to do? It's found in verse 3, or what do they want to do? Let us burst their bonds apart and cast away the cords of God from us. The things that hold us together, things that God said to do, how to live right, nations, kings, rulers around the world plot together to get rid of that stuff. They don't plot together to make things better all that often. I'm not against politicians, rulers. We need mayors. We need all sorts of senators. We need that stuff because we are fallen people. All people are fallen. Left to our own devices, we'd all do not good things. Without God saving us, his Holy Spirit leading us, we'd all be worse than we are. So God said, yeah, you need rulers. If you're not going to listen to me, you're going to get rulers. He told Israel that back in the day. It still goes on. If you're familiar with the Psalms, you might look in your English Bible. Usually they'll say like, this is a Psalm of David, or this is a Psalm of Asaph, or this is a Psalm of Moses. If you look at these first two Psalms, they don't say that. We actually don't know who wrote these. We don't know if David wrote Psalm 1 and 2, or if he wrote one, somebody wrote the other. We actually have no historical evidence of who wrote them. We don't know. Literally the best scholars in the world, they don't know who wrote these, but there's a reason they're at the beginning. The Psalms were collected as a group. There's 150 Psalms. They were collected together as we call it a book. There are actually 5 books. It's actually like 5 pieces of the puzzle in Psalms, which is meant to resemble Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They weren't collected until somewhere collected all together like that, somewhere around, say, 400 BC. So if you're thinking, like, what happened then? 400 BC would be the same time as the end of the Old Testament. So the Psalms are brought together as a collection, like all 150, put them together, start reading them together or singing them, whatever they did. That was around the end of the Old Testament, the time of Malachi, Zechariah, Haggai, Ezra and Nehemiah would be just a tad bit before that. So some of these people, these minor prophets that you probably don't remember who they are, they're all around 500 BC, 400 BC. But what the big event why they're all there is God was bringing Israel out of the exile to Babylon. So Israel was exiled twice. Northern Israel was exiled in 726 or something like that. I forget the exact date, BC. And then southern Israel, which we think of as like the real Israel, it's Judah, it's Jerusalem, it's Zion, that's mentioned here, Zion, his holy hill. That's all in southern Israel. And that is the southern kingdom, so-called 2 tribes of Judah and Benjamin. They get exiled in 586 BC. And they stay in exile, which was predicted, for 70 years. And then God rescues them through various people like Ezra and Nehemiah. There's a guy named Zerubbabel in there, becomes the new king. And the Psalms are collected right at that time to say, hey, Israel, you just went through literally about 1,000 years of sort of coming together under Moses, rising to prominence under King David and King Solomon, and then falling apart and ending up in exile, punished by nations because God let them, because they've been disobedient. What was Israel's disobedience? To throw off what they knew, to not follow God's word. That all comes down in 586, if I remember the exact date, 586 BC. They get rescued 70 years later. They come back into Israel, and it's a mess. So you read like the book of Nehemiah. The walls are all broken down. He has to generate money, and he tries to stimulate people to rebuild the walls of the city. Ezra, along with some others. Ezra is a scribe who, in his book, he describes they rediscover or find God's word, the law of the Lord, which we'll read about or have in Psalm chapter 1. They find it again. They lost it. They somehow ignored God's word to the point where, we didn't entirely know that it actually was in the temple. That's what they end up rebuilding the temple. And they find it there randomly. Not like we rebuild the temple so we can know the Bible. They rebuilt the temple and then sort of somehow stumbled across God's word. And what do we know? Now we have it again. That's not a good spot to be in. That's not the place the persons ought to be. But that is where Israel found themselves. And they brought the Psalms together, and they put these first two Psalms first. These two Psalms could have gone later. They're number one, number two. Psalm number one, individuals. What are you doing with your life? We're going to talk about that. Psalm number two, hey nations, what are you doing with your lives? What this writer, 2,500 years ago, sounds like he's writing about things in 2021, as though you're getting text messages or text news pushed through on your feed. You're getting your news feed, and you see Iran is dropping a drone on some ship in the whichever Gulf that is. I can't remember exactly where. They killed some couple of sailors, and it was potentially an anti-Israel thing, even though it was a British sailor that died. And then Israel said they're going to strike back. They sent missiles up to Lebanon. For the first time in, 15 or 20 years, Lebanon launched missiles back at Israel this week. Russia is somehow involved, saying that they're going to broker all of it. They're going to be the peace people or something for the whole thing. Syria is a mess. Afghanistan falling apart because the U.S. pulled out. That's all 2 weeks of just kind of worldwide news sort of stuff going on. Whoever wrote Psalm 2, which we don't know, but it's at least 2,500 years old, at least. It might actually go farther back than that. 2,500 years ago, this author saw the same stuff. I don't know where he got his news feed. He didn't have social media. He didn't have his phone, right? I don't really think he had a newspaper, though they could publish at that point. Not publish. They had paper. They knew how to write, etc. Somehow there's news passing around. Whoever wrote this, maybe it was King David. We don't know. But whoever wrote it was well informed that what are the nations out there doing? Raging. What do they do when they rage? They plot against God. What are they plotting? To throw off God, to get rid of him. We don't want to follow what God told us. That Israel experienced that. All the nations around them had experienced that. This author has some comments to make back. It's starting in verse 4, chapter 2, verse 4. He who sits in the heavens laughs. Who sits in the heavens? God. So what's God doing? He's laughing. Many of you have probably said that maybe about yourselves. You've heard a preacher say that. I think God laughs at me, and you probably meant it in a good way. He laughs at you kind of making a dumb mistake or something. This isn't that sort of laughing. This is, I sit in heaven. You want to mess around with me? I'll laugh at you when I stomp on you. Now, we don't usually use that language for our loving God who reached out his arms and died and, saved us, because he's expressing love towards us through Christ to forgive our sins. But that's not the only thing God does. That's not all that God is. This loving, gentle guy who gives us a little, kiss when we get a boo-boo on our knee. That's not the picture of God in the Bible. The picture of God in the Bible is, if you want to plot together to go against me and rebel against everything I'm doing, I don't have anything else left but to beat you. I'm going to beat you at your own game. I'm not going to lose. I'm not going to let you throw off my cords that I've put around you. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision, so he looks down on them. This would be like Tom Brady, if you're a football person. I like football. So Tom Brady, the Super Bowl winning quarterback of many, many Super Bowls at this point, including the past one this year. That'd be like Tom Brady coming over here to Lisbon. Do you guys have a football team? Do you have a high school football team? And the high school football team's, it's a joint team, co-op, or what was that? Oh, yeah, okay. You have a team here, and Tom Brady comes over, or Tom Brady is somewhere involved in that, and your high school quarterback starts saying how he's going to beat him and he's laughing at him and all this, and Tom Brady's just like, okay, what's he going to do? He's going to look down on him a bit and say, bring it on, dude. You know, if you really want a competition, I'm pretty sure I could beat you. That's what God is saying here. He's just sort of sitting there laughing at the foolishness. And it's not just kidness. It's not like foolish kids, nations as foolish kids. This is nations as putting all their efforts together, the best that we've got, to throw away God. So if you ever read the newspaper, like I might, or you watch the news if you're still a nightly news watcher, or you listen to it on the radio, or you watch your news feed through your phone or something, you see nations doing that constantly. And they were constantly doing it 2,500 years ago or more as well. It's not a new thing. It's not sudden or out of the blue. God will speak to them. This is following in verse 5 and 6. He will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury. And he tells them something. As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. All the plotting, this past election, a whole lot of debate about whether things were counted correctly and who won and who didn't win and on and on. I don't know if we'll ever know the truth, like for sure, the truth about that, because ultimately the nations plot together to like mess things up. I mean, that's what they're doing. Whichever way you side, whichever side of the aisle you're on, we probably won't ever quite know exactly what happened. But God knows, for one, he knows everything, right? But he also says something in verse 6. As for me, so as for God, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. You can mess around with elections all day long. Do what you guys do down there. But that isn't what God's doing. I already set my king on Zion, which we see as Jerusalem nowadays. But I've already set my king on my holy hill. I already picked out what I wanted. I picked the ruler I already wanted. The elections need to happen. We need to submit to our rulers, says that in Romans, etc. But that isn't God's like big plan. God's already got his guy in charge. We know him as Jesus. That comes, later in history. It's revealed that it's Jesus. But he's like telling these people in 2500 years ago, 500 BC or earlier, I already have my king. I already set him in where I wanted him. You can plot in vain all you want. It's going nowhere. And if you really want to oppose God, he will do other things like rule you with a rod of iron. I will tell of the decree that the Lord said to me. This one gets quoted in the New Testament about Jesus. You are my son. Today I have begotten you. So this is God before Jesus came, is already prophesying of this in the Psalms. I have a person who's my king, and he's actually going to be known as my son. Not some random guy I picked out. He's the one. He's the chosen one. Today I have begotten you. Today I've done this. God has already done this long before Jesus personally, humanly showed up on earth. But he also did it long before you or I existed, before there was a Trump versus Biden, before there was a Trump versus Hillary, before there was George Bush versus whoever was first in back then and all that. Before whatever you went through, maybe some of you obviously look like you're older, so you've seen other elections before that. So you've seen, Reagan taking out Carter, or you've seen Ford taking over maybe for Nixon as he fell apart, or you've seen all that sort of stuff. God saw that long, like 2,500 years or more. He already said, I've got the guy sitting here that I want. I call him my son. Today I've begotten you. I've set him as king on my holy hill. Nations can mess around all they want. It does nothing to mess up God's plan. He actually tells his son, which we know as Jesus, something in verse 8. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You'll break them with a rod of iron, and you'll dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Jesus actually is the ruler of those nations. All these nations that are conspiring against whoever. So some are going against Israel. I think that's probably a bad decision on their part. Some probably hate the U.S. The U.S. probably hates some other ones, all sorts of stuff. All of those nations are actually ruled by a different ruler than we generally put into power. He's not a Republican or a Democrat. It's actually Jesus. He's the Son of God, set as king on God's holy hill to rule those nations. He'll actually receive those nations as his inheritance. and he will rule them with a rod of iron. That's here in Psalm chapter 2. It's actually picked up again in the New Testament as well, where it says, every knee will bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. It's referring to this. There is a comment then made by the author, I guess, here of the psalm, whoever that might be, starts in verse 10. Now, therefore, O king, so he's saying, hey, kings, I got something. You should be wise. You should be warned, O rulers of the earth. So all you kings, all you rulers, all these people fomenting about things today, you should be warned. You should be smart. You should pay attention to something. What? Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish along the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. If a ruler of a nation or a city, a town, whatever, wanted to be wise, they would remember who's in charge. It's God. He has a king, known as Jesus. Here it's known as his Son, because Jesus hadn't come yet. They don't know his name is Jesus. They know that he's a ruler. That's being revealed. He's God's Son, specially picked out. If you want to have a good life, it's easy. Serve the Lord with fear. Rejoice with trembling. This isn't, you notice there's a rejoice here. It doesn't say live in fear and cower as God squashes you. No, you only have to do that if you're a king who's being bad. If you're a king who's wise, you serve the Lord with fear, because he can squash us. You serve him with fear, and then you get to rejoice. You rejoice that you're serving the real king who's really doing what needs to be done. You kiss the Son, which is this imagery of a king. If I was the king and someone comes in, they hold out their hand or something, people bow down and they kiss them. He says, if you want to serve the right master, kiss the Son, which we know again as Jesus. Lest he be angry and you perish along the way, his wrath is quickly kindled. Since God knows everything, Jesus is ruling over everything, he knows what people are up to. He knows what nations are up to. He knows who's plotting against him, who's messing around in the background, who's cheating, who's all those things. God already knows that. He's not just letting it slide. Because we could come to that conclusion. If this is 2,500 or more years ago, why is God just letting it go? Well, he's not, actually. 2,500 or more years ago, he already said who's the king. The real king is his Son. Becomes revealed to us as Jesus. That's the real king, and his wrath will be kindled against nations that plot in vain. Their vanity is they think they're doing something, but they're really not. They're not going to throw off God's restraints or God's cords. Then this very last line of chapter 2. Blessed are all, so blessed is everyone, who takes refuge in him. That will apply to us. That's going to be one of the groups I asked to respond. If you already start preparing for this, even though we're going to do chapter 1 as well, if you heard me talk about this and you realize hey, I do that. I hope none of you, I assume none of us, are plotting against God. But yet we read the news and we worry about people that are doing that. So I might read the news and worry about, who got elected or who didn't, which is a valid worry. It affects my life directly, right? So there are things to think about for that. But if you found yourself thinking that those nations were plotting and getting somewhere rather than plotting in vain, you're literally not obeying the word of God. So if I get up in the morning and I say, I don't know, what happens if Russia sends troops to Syria and they take on Israel and the U.S. has to decide whether they're going to side with Israel or not, and then they launch missiles. If you start getting into that pattern, you're not following the word of God. There's actually a king in charge. His name, we know him as Jesus. He's been in charge before those nations existed. It says it right here because this was written at least 2,500 years ago. Might be another 1,000 or more than that. Before those nations even existed, there was a king in charge, and he's been in charge. He's not losing. He doesn't get elected. He's actually appointed by God. There's no election. He is the king, period. He's seated where God wants him to be seated. We need to trust that. We need to be blessed are all of us who take refuge in him. That is our refuge. So corporately, if you've said this yourself, if you heard anybody around you say it, with the things that have gone on in the past, 5 or 7 years, America's fallen apart. we might be coming to an end. Who knows? The greatest nation in the history of the planet might be falling down. Well, one, that could very well be true because nations rise and nations fall. So yes, that could be true. Number two, it usually exhibits this sense of very close vision. It means my nation's falling apart. What I like is falling apart. All nations fall apart. The only one that stands is Jesus. He's the only king that actually lasts. So if you've been worried about that, you're one of these people who's actually worrying about what these vain rulers are doing. Let's go to chapter 1, kind of the other type of person that might be here. What if you are not really tied, you haven't tied yourself into politics and worldwide events. You try to just sort of live your life, keep your head down, have a good life, and do it. You're an individual then. You're not against everybody, but you're trying to just live your life the way you ought to. Maybe chapter 1 applies to us, that sort of person as well. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of wicked, or stands with sinners, or sits with scoffers, but rather, instead, this is verse 2 of chapter 1, instead his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. That law, as we've come to know it, put together for us as a Bible. If you want to have peace, if you want to have confidence, if we want to have freedom, true freedom, there's a pretty easy way to do it. Delight in the law of the Lord, and on his law meditate day and night. It's a simple solution. It's not the same as meditating on your social news feed, whether that's nations or whether that's, I should never joke about this, but I find it baffling to me. Teenagers will commit suicide because somebody put something on their social news feed that bullied them. They said something bad about them, and a teenager will react and say oh my goodness, they all hate me, and kill themselves. I guess I've never thought that way. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I don't care what people think about me too much, but in some ways I'm why would you be doing that? But if they had been meditating on God's law, the Bible, day and night, they wouldn't do that. This is the cure. It's a solution to much, if not all, of what's wrong with our world. And here in chapter 1, our own lives, our personal, individual lives are fixed. They're made better by the law of the Lord, or the word of God. What's that person like? He's like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf doesn't wither. Pretty easy for us to envision probably this summer. So a drought. I actually I work on a farm in the summer, so I teach during the year. But during the summer, I still go work for a local farmer, and mostly we make hay. He sells alfalfa a lot and stuff. So this year he's got about a quarter to a third crop, of how much we usually make. He usually hires me kind of all summer and scrambling to get done, so to speak, for me to go back to college, something like that. Actually, I worked first cutting, which wasn't great. Worked a little bit of second cutting, and then he's I really ain't gonna have anything else for you to do the rest of the summer because there's nothing to do. It's not growing. This is a tree that's planted by streams of water. It doesn't wither like that. It doesn't fall apart like that. It's like native cottonwoods out here. You have a slough, and if you don't spray that slough or don't mow it down all the time, pretty soon these cottonwoods will sprout up, and then they'll grow. And now you get these huge trees randomly in the middle of a field because somebody let it grow, and there was water there, and it grew for 100 years before it falls down most of the time and get huge. Those trees are like that. They found that source of water. Where is that source of water? It's what we call the Bible, the law of the Lord. Doesn't wither. And this crazy statement here in verse 3 of chapter 1, the last line, in all that he does, he prospers. We heard a testimony this morning, in a drought, with a wheat crop, prayed over, yielded better than you've ever done before. So what does that tell us? You could have worked smarter, not harder, all those other years. No, anyways, you go out and pray more often. No. Many of us have the same situation. We don't pray hard until we think oh, there's a crisis. What's happening? Maybe we should have prayed like that all the way through. You could have, who knows, 100 bushel the acre. I don't know, but no, probably not. But your testimony, I've heard that testimony actually this late summer from a number of other people down in Ellendale, meaning farmers. I just talked to this it was a college student who came by my house, which I don't usually let them do that too much because I don't really want them to. But I was randomly out in my yard, and this college student's walking by, and he's a talkative type. So anyway, he stopped by to talk. And asked him how he's doing. He's like, oh, I'm going like crazy. I'm working for this farmer, doing wheat, running the grain cart and stuff. And I was like, well, that's not that much to do, is there? He's like, yeah, this guy's making, like, he's doing really well. I was like, well, that's great. So I said, what do you think's the difference? He's like, I'm pretty sure, it kind of dawned on him when I asked him that, this student. He's like, I'm pretty sure it's because he prays so much. Him and his wife and family, they get up and they pray every single morning about their crops. And they're like the only ones that got crops going on right now. I'm not saying God picks out favorites and, all that. But there is a line here that says, in all that he does, he prospers because he follows God's word. That is true. We see it in the midst of something literally like a drought. We might see it in the middle of, figurative, theoretical droughts in our own lives or something. The wicked are not so. They're like the chaff that the wind drives away. So if you've seen the combines out lately doing wheat, or in the fall they're doing soybeans, if the wind's not howling like it usually is in North Dakota, you can actually track where the combines are in the field because you see these dust plumes from miles away. Like a dust plume coming up out of there, they're combining. That's the chaff. It's floating away in the wind. It's being shaken out, thrown out the back of the combine. If the wind's blowing, it takes it up in the air. Creates a lot of dust, might cause you allergies too. But that's like the wicked. The people that were talked about as entire nations in chapter 2, that's what happens to them. They float away in the clouds. Not in the clouds, but they float away as a dust plume blown away. It's not happening for them. They don't end up in the bin. They're not the crop that gets harvested and they actually get what they wanted. They don't ever get what they wanted. And if you've ever, if you follow politics or something, they never get what they want. They're never satisfied, ever. They might pass a bill and they're never like, oh, we got what we wanted, ever. They're never satisfied. That's because they're plotting against what God wants, and they're being blown away like chaff in the wind. This chapter 1 is more for individuals, though. If you feel like you're being blown away like chaff in the wind, you have to question yourself. Is what I'm doing prospering or not? Because if it isn't, possibly I'm not following God's law. Doesn't mean we don't have problems in life, crises, things that happen. But there should be some sense of peace, some sense of stability, some sense I'm like a tree, like a native cottonwood, planted in a slough that's got water. I found the water, and it doesn't really matter what happens. This farmer I worked for, I don't work for him in the winter, thankfully, I guess. But anyway, he was burning sloughs. Everybody was burning sloughs last year because it was dry, right? So they can get in there and fight the cattails. So everybody's lighting sloughs up all over the place. He burned this slough, and it had an electric line pole, a power line pole in the middle of the slough, and he didn't take proper precautions, and he caught the thing on fire, and he almost burned it in half, and he had to call the power company, and they fine you because you damaged, you went after their power pole. So he got fined for it, all this sort of stuff. That is pretty similar. Like, that power pole is not planted, but the cottonwoods that are planted in the slough, they got roots that go down deep and get water. You can light the slough on fire all you want. Cottonwood don't burn down. It doesn't even matter, seemingly. I don't know if it helps it maybe or something, but that's what you could be like. An individual can be like that. If the water that you're reading every day, meditating on, is the Bible. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, and sinners won't stand in the congregation of the righteous. All the people that are trying to do the amazing things don't, because God's judging them, and in the end, he's in charge, and his judgment stands. We're going against the word of God. It doesn't work. Doesn't matter how much it might look like it's working. If we're not meditating on God's word and following it day and night, all the time, every day, like that's what he's getting at. It's constant in your life. If it's not constant in your life, most of what you're doing is going to be chaff. It's going to blow away. It doesn't amount to anything. It gets burned up. It doesn't stand. The Lord knows the way of the righteous. This is the last verse of chapter 1. The Lord knows the way of the righteous. He knows. If you're righteous, meditating on God's word day and night, he knows your way. It's established. You're not going to trip and fall and stumble and lose it. You'll actually keep on going because you'll be like that tree that's solid. God knows your way. He's happy with your way in that sense. With Jordan and Joe, Jordan gave a testimony this morning of when we're following what we think God's call is in our life, based on what they understand God wants from them, suddenly all the dominoes start falling in place, one after the other after the other. All the dominoes just line up. If the dominoes in our lives aren't lining up, you always have to ask yourself, does God know my way and he's actually preventing it? He doesn't want that? Am I actually following some other alternative? Doesn't mean, again, that we'll never have problems or crises or issues. But even, I don't know, you've probably seen this. People that'll get horrible terminal cancer, like a terrible disease or something, it's terrible. If they're a person who meditates on God's word, they read it regularly, they follow it, they use it, they focus on it, notice how they have peace. Notice how they don't go, don't go off the deep end, they don't go crazy about it. And they'll end up talking to other people, and other people are like, why are you so peaceful? How are you doing that? Why aren't you going to die? And they're like, well, God knows my way. Things are good. My dad is, both my dad and my mom are still alive. My dad's 90, I think it is. 90 years old. Anyways, his health is headed downhill. It's not great. Let's put it that way. And I come from a big family. I have a couple of unsaved, one sister especially is unsaved. And my dad's a Christian, and he's been a Christian, I think, forever, as far as I know, all 90 years of his life or something, but once he got saved as a kid. So anyway, he's a Christian, and he's a very simple person. He's a farmer, and he just he gets up in the morning, he reads a chapter in his Bible, and he goes to work. That's literally 90 years of his life, or I guess he didn't know how to read when he's a baby, but still, that's it. That's all he's done, and I'm not, denigrating that. He gets up every single morning, early, really early, reads a chapter in the Bible, says a prayer, and then goes to work. And does that for 90 years or however long it is. He's very at peace. His life is prospered. He doesn't worry about all the things. Sometimes I ask him, I call him up for perspective, what was it like when World War II? And he's like, well, it was bad. Nations, whole world at war. And read your Bible and go to work. And he's at peace. My unsafe sister especially, she can't comprehend it. She doesn't have peace like that. She's kind of freaking out, dad's going to die, mom's going to die. Okay, yes, all people die, right? Tell my sister, that is what happens to people, right? Be ready for that. That's what we get out of these couple of chapters. You can be ready for what comes. You can be ready for nations plotting and conspiring everything and trusting that Jesus is the king who's in charge. We can focus on God's word individually and be ready for anything. We're like a tree planted by water. Drought comes, it didn't die. I haven't seen native cottonwoods that aren't in odd places that farmers tend to spray them with Roundup or something. But native cottonwoods that are there, planted, they found their water, they're not dying in this drought. They're not keeling over. They just keep on living. You can be like that. Each one of us can be like that. And I want to encourage you, we're going to have a time of response. I'm sure that many of us could find ourselves, if you want to come, in one of those two chapters. Either, I hope none of us are conspiring against God. If you are one of the persons that's conspiring against God, then stop. But yes, we'll have an altar call for you. That's bad. I'm assuming since you're in church, that's probably not most of us, right? But most of us, I bet, worry a lot. We spend more time than we should worrying about the things of chapter 2, nations and what's going to happen, and is America going to fall apart, and what if the wrong guy got elected? And we worry about that kind of stuff more than we ought to, because we should have a bigger perspective. Jesus is in charge. Well, God's in charge, and Jesus, his son, is sitting on a throne already 2,500 years ago. So 500 BC, somebody wrote this, that God's got his son, king, sitting on the throne. 2,500 years later, I shouldn't be worried about it. I shouldn't be upset that the world is going crazy around us. It's always been going crazy. Since Adam and Eve fell into sin and people then populated the earth, by Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, the world was going crazy. Nations against God, constantly. Been that way for a few thousand years. It's not unusual in 2021 to have that going on. You might find yourself in chapter 1 as an individual. Maybe you're not as focused on this, the law of the Lord, the Bible we call it now. Maybe you're not as focused on it as you ought to be. You're not meditating on it day and night like we all ought to be. And then you find yourself worrying. You find yourself drying out. You find yourself thinking you might not make it or maybe not prospering, something like that. That's usually a problem individually of not putting our focus where it needs to be, which is here, meditating on God's word. So I'm going to ask us to respond to that. It doesn't mean if you're coming up forward, I'm going to ask us to come forward and kind of pray together as a group. It doesn't mean like you're saying, I'm a terrible individual. I've never read my Bible for 20 years. If that's you, that is terrible. But I think all of us, I'm really asking for commitment. All of us could probably commit more, including me. I'm the Bible professor, right? I'm the chairman of the Biblical and Theological Studies Department. I could do more. Like without a doubt, I could individually be focused on the Bible more every day, all throughout the day. I'm sure many of you could as well. If you fit into one of those two categories, either too worried about the world, what it's up to, and not focused enough on Jesus as King, or kind of know like I probably should plant my roots a little deeper in the good stuff where the water's at, called the Bible, I'm going to ask you to respond and just kind of pray. I'm going to close us in prayer after that, but sort of you and God talk it out. Say like, hey, what do you want from me? What am I doing? And do you have a song? Maybe that third song, or do you have a song? Okay, just going to play and maybe sing the song. If you would like to respond, I would encourage you to do so. So come forward, and then we're going to pray at the end of that.
Your throne of grace, I humbly bow. My affections I pour out, my eyes release their tears. I behold the beauty of you, Lord. How I long to see your face. Yes, I long to see your face. You are my dwelling place. With you, my heart will stay. Beauty of you, Lord. How I long to see your face. Yes, I long to see your face.
We're going to pray together, and then we will be dismissed. Dear Lord, we thank you very much for revealing yourself to us and for giving us your word. So we have such an easy form now, the Bible, your law put together for us. It's there. And I pray that you'd help each of us as individuals to commit to that, to making that what we focus on, to making that our anchor, you want to say it that way, our roots, the water that we have as individuals. So when things do come our way, whether that's old age or sickness or crisis or something gone wrong, lost jobs, lost money, pandemics, pregnancies gone wrong, all sorts of stuff that happens, we need roots that don't dry out. And those are, those are found in your word, or it's found as we are in your word. I pray that you help all of us as individuals to make a stronger commitment, a greater commitment to meditating. It doesn't mean we read 24 hours a day, but we can be thinking about your word and your law, and what you want from us as individuals. And that results in good things. You said that we will prosper then, not be like chaff. I pray that you'd help all of us to do that. And then also kind of the chapter 2, the second chapter that you put there, ultimately for Israel to pay attention to. The nations can go crazy. They can be up against trying to do everything against you that they can even think of. Throw off every restraint that might be there that you've put in place. Help us not to be doing that, and help us not to be worried about that either. Since you're in charge, you sit on the throne, you're a king, you're a good king. You said we should rejoice, actually, that you're a king. We should kiss the Son. We should come to you and expect you to be king and respect you as king. Help us to do that. Help us to be people that, as we go around in the world, as we go to jobs, as we talk to others, that we spread that news that Jesus is the king, and he's not losing. It's not like nations are going to come against him and actually win. It doesn't happen that way. You reassured Israel. It don't go that way in 500 BC. 2,500 years later, you're still in charge. Help us to commit to that as we talk to others, as we're out amongst the nations, so-called. Help us to help them realize that the latest and greatest or most terrible nations out there are not standing up to you. They don't get their way when they throw off what you've put before us. Help us, honestly, as a nation, as much as we can as Americans, to convince America that throwing away your ways and your plans aren't good. If we do that as a nation, we get crushed. It's a guarantee that you laugh at us and then you have to rule with a rod of iron over us. I pray that you would help each of us as individuals, citizens, Americans, whatever, living here, to try to show that to other people, that we're not supposed to be in rebellion against you. We're not trying to get rid of what you are or who you are, what you've told us. We're supposed to follow it. That's where the blessing is. And I pray that you'd help each of us to do that in our own personal life, so we can, all that we do prospers, and then corporately, as much as we can, influence our nation, other nations, to follow you, because that's where blessing is. It's easy blessing in that sense to follow you. It's guaranteed. It's a guaranteed return on investment. I pray you'd help all of us to commit to that more strongly. So we live in the last days. We live in times of what seems like more and more people around the world trying to throw you off, trying to not be restrained by what you said. I pray that you'd help all of us to be more restrained, more focused upon what you're doing and what you said you would do and how it's going to go. And we would witness of that. We would tell other people of that, literally around the world, because other people around the world need to know it too. Help us all to do that and to do it well. And we do then want to rejoice in you, rejoice with you, and we want to live in your blessing. I pray that we would. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.